technical evangelist for Status, and what we do is sort of make sure that networks like Ethereum can actually work on resource-restricted devices like your phone. So our mission is to sort of make the world a more open and equitable place by putting, the power of Web3 into everybody's pockets, and actually making sure that the potential that's offered by these decentralized networks is actually sort of realized in tools that people use every day with an interface that they are already intimately familiar with.
Very cool. So I can imagine there's lots of kind of technical challenges in getting, being able to interact with the blockchain from mobile. Are there any, what are some of the biggest challenges in that area?
So, the two biggest ones are data consumption and battery use. So, we've had a working product for nearly a year now, but in early versions of the product, because the computational overhead of running these decentralized networks and the trade-offs that you're making to achieve proper decentralization are so stark. In early versions of our products, we were using upwards of 10 gigabytes of mobile data a day, and we could
so
eat your battery. Right. Yeah, you better. Your battery could sort of die in about 3 hours. Right. Using early versions of Whisper, which is the decentralized communication protocol that we use. And so for a year, we've been working down in the bowels of Ethereum, actually writing and rewriting the protocols to make sure that. Our data use at the moment in the latest builds on the app is about 10 to 20 megabytes, which is the same order of magnitude as any other instant messenger out there. Yeah. And battery use, especially when the app is running in the background, is essentially negligible. So we're sort of finally at a stage where we can think about releasing a public beta, but it's taken a long time to get there. Making sure that you maintain the sort of security and privacy guarantees that these networks offer, but in a way that doesn't sort of, make it unusable for the end user is a very, very difficult challenge.
Okay, so one of the kind of topics of conversation at the conference has been decentralization. What does it mean? How do you define it? How do you measure it? How important is it, and so on? Are there any trade-offs on the kind of decentralization side with the way Status works? Is everyone running their own node, or is everyone referencing some kind of centrally running node?
So we take a very hard stance on decentralization. We think that the benefits that it brings in terms of freedom of speech, economic inclusion, the ability to own your own data, self-sovereign identity, and a whole slew of other sort of advantages are so worthwhile that it's worth sort of making those computational overhead trade-offs and finding ways to optimize the protocol. So in fact, with Status, every single person is running their own light node, right? So we use the light Ethereum service, which means we're only checking block headers, and we use something called the canonical hash tree, which is sort of checkpoints in the chain that allow us to get up to speed with what's going on with the chain without using too much mobile data. It's sort of like the SPV concept in Bitcoin, but for Ethereum. And so you get 99.9% of the security guarantees. Obviously, it's not quite the same as running a full node, but you are actually running a proper node on Ethereum, right? And this, it's an interesting feature to taking a hard stance in decentralization has meant that not only do our users get to leverage the benefit of properly decentralized products and systems, but also by doing that and by making sure that every one of them is running their own node when they download the Status app, we actually make sure that the Ethereum network, which is currently sitting at 28,000 nodes, and when we push that out to, we've got a group of about 50,000 internal testers, when we push out a mainnet build to them, that immediately jumps to 80, 90,000 nodes, and we can start talking about, really decentralized networks, properly robust protocols.
Very interesting. That's really interesting. So to change tack slightly, how did you, and this is a question I always find interesting, how did you kind of first get into the blockchain or into the Ethereum space? What was your kind of entry point into the world?
So I was interested in Bitcoin from very early on. I come from South Africa, and it was immediately obvious to me that the opportunity to implement an alternative financial system that didn't require, government-issued photo IDs and a credit history was incredibly powerful. And, the case for making sure that we weren't relying on any central institutions like governments and banks to secure value is very easy to make in the developing world where, corruption and these kind of things are absolutely rampant. But unfortunately, with Bitcoin, while I love it dearly, like all it really managed to do was replace governance and bureaucratic barriers with technical ones. And so the fact that you need specialized hardware and a certain level of skill to actually like run a node and participate in these networks is quite a problem, particularly in developing countries where these things are supposedly going to have the biggest impact. So when Ethereum rolled around and it was the possibility of having, Turing complete language and a whole virtual machine on a chain, that would then allow us to sort of like tackle things like scaling at the application layer, not just down in the protocol, and then like build tools that, like I say with Status, that actually allow people to participate in the network, but with tools that they already have in their pockets and using an interface that they understand. This to me, it just makes perfect sense, right? I really hope that this is how we can begin to implement some of the sort of highfalutin rhetoric that was thrown around Bitcoin in the early days, and actually like make sure that we can, unbank the world, right?
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah. I think that's really interesting. I think, I guess Bitcoin didn't start out with, as you say, with these kind of high barriers to entry with mining and so on, but I guess that's where it's ended up. But yeah, very interesting. Are there any kind of key misconceptions or particular misconceptions around Status which you come across, which you can clear up?
Yeah, the biggest one for me is always like people consistently ask us like, how do you guys pay for the gas costs of your messages? And of course, like there are no gas costs for the messages because we use Whisper. And this is like something that, it takes a little bit of time to illustrate, but it's well worth going into, is that like the EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine, which is where like the blockchain and all the consensus logic happens, all the things that you'll read about in the media, is only one of three like equally important parts of the Ethereum technical stack. The other two are Swarm, which is a decentralized file storage protocol, and Whisper, which is this end-to-end encrypted dark peer-to-peer chat. And so like, these all use the same transport layer, which is called dev P2P. But Whisper itself, these messages are not getting sent over the chain, right? So you're not like committing the messages into the blockchain, so you don't have to pay gas. And in fact, like the interesting thing about this is that, like you can sort of have a completely private, dark, end-to-end encrypted messenger in combination with a public auditable global ledger, right? And so this is where we can get to sort of like conversational commerce on steroids, because you have like both the combination of privacy preserving technologies which enhance like freedom of speech and all of those good things, and this public immutable global ledger that you can sort of read and write to deterministically. And like those two things in combination make it a really interesting project to work on.
So it's really interesting. You talked about Whisper and how it's kind of one of the three pillars of I guess kind of the Web3 stack. So do you want to tell the kind of viewers, maybe in layman type terms, what are some of the sort of differences between using something like Whisper versus some of the more familiar messaging technologies like WhatsApp or iMessage?
Absolutely. So the biggest and most important difference is that there are no servers between you and the person that you're trying to send a message to. So there's fantastic messaging protocols out there at the moment, Open Whisper systems and Signal, and like their double ratchet encryption methods, and Telegram like provide really, really great services. But the point is like at an architectural level, how these systems are actually built means that, like, for instance, the Russian government can come in and demand the decryption keys for Telegram's database. And even like Telegram has the choice about whether they comply or not, but like it's possible to make that demand. Whereas with Status, there are no servers, there's no database, all of the like users have the keys themselves. So there's no way that you could ever like demand that kind of thing from us because we just don't have it, right? So like quite literally at an architectural level, we're sort of radically different to any of the currently existing message protocols. And you can see out there in the world at the moment, so Whisper, Open Whisper Systems, Signal, they recently put out a blog that sort of details how both Google and Amazon have prevented them from doing something called domain fronting, which allows them to sort of get around censorship in countries that are actively trying to sort of stop the messenger from working there. Google and Amazon have squashed that, and it now means that they can't operate in those countries. And like I say, we don't even really need to talk about WhatsApp and what's happened to that data. And Telegram has been banned in Iran, and there's all these shenanigans happening in Russia. That sort of stuff, like, it's just not possible for a centralized institution to like subpoena Status databases because there are none.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. So So over the last 18 months, we've seen this kind of proliferation, or lots and lots of utility tokens being issued, obviously including the status token. The kind of Polymath thesis is that over the next 1 to 2 years, we'll see this shift away from utility tokens towards security tokens, which are these kind of more regulatory or kind of regulatory compliant with KYC and AML, and where the token itself represents some sort of investment or off-chain assets. Is that something? How do you see that kind of tokenization of real assets moving forward?
Yeah, look, I mean, I share that thesis, and I think that the move to at least be somewhat more regulatory compliance is ultimately a good thing. But I want to take a slightly more historical view of this stuff and just sort of look at the power of the narrative behind it, right, for a moment. And so if you look at sort of the developments of human civilization over the years, one of the unique features of being human is the ability to imagine and talk about things that don't actually exist, right? And so this begins sort of with the development of organized religion, and we're able to tell these fictions that are now increasingly greater numbers of people to organize around ideas that have no material existence, right? And then obviously after the sort of rise of organized religions, you get the rise of the nation states, and then next most important is this concept of the limited liability corporation, right? This legal fiction that we tell each other. And in fact, it's a really interesting story, because the first sort of formal LLC that existed was the Dutch East India Company. But if you look at the actual history of that, right, there were a whole bunch of sort of single share option LLCs that existed before the VOC. And these guys, it would just be for a single ship's journey, and you get a whole bunch of ship shareholders together. As soon as the ship arrived and delivered its product, you'd dissolve the company, hand out the profits, and off you would go. And it took about 100 years for the public to actually become okay with this as a fundraising model, to send the ships overseas and to actually figure out that the regulatory structure that would make it possible for a majority of people to actually participate in these sort of endeavors. And I see us at a very similar stage with tokens, right? So tokens are just another fiction that we're able to tell each other that allows us to sort of coordinate in ever greater numbers. And we're at those early single stock ventures with the ships sailing out into the unknown, and I sort of see this move from sort of utility to securities and becoming slightly more regulatory compliant as software eating the world, and just that same 100-year cycle that it took to get to the VOC, but just on steroids, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something that in technology we're used to seeing these changes happening incredibly fast, right? And whether it's something that maybe took 100 years or something, these sort of shifts now seem to happen almost overnight, and it's exciting to be a part of anyway.
Yes, and confusing.
Exactly, and sometimes a little bit scary. Yeah. That's great. So you talked about we've talked about decentralization, we've talked about status. So where do you see in the kind of broader blockchain or decentralized internet space, where do you see statuses kind of placed within that world?
So I mean, we see ourselves as the window onto Ethereum, right? And certainly like for mobile applications, if you're wanting to build mobile first stuff, you should be leveraging Status, because we're so deeply committed to decentralization that all of the benefits that we're able to give to our end users means that you can just go ahead and build a normal sort of web D app, but then hook into Status and leverage all of the features that we've spent a year optimizing and building to actually perform on mobile phones. So for us, it's about how do we provide as clear a possible window that has as expansive a view as possible, and it's a difficult proposition to achieve, but we've made some really, really good progress in the last year, and we're really looking forward to being more open to third-party developers that can literally you can imagine webhooks for Web3, right? You can just hook into certain parts of Status, like our contact lists or the location of the phone or various other things, and leverage those for whatever it is that you're building in your decentralized app.
That makes sense. And do you see? So I guess one of the challenges in blockchain overall is adoption, right? So I think lots of all of our kind of high hopes for how blockchain is going to change the world and so on kind of rest on adoption. If it's only ever adopted by tech-savvy, geek-type people, then it's kind of a failure, right? Because you need it to be more widely adopted. You need to be accessible. Do you think Status has a kind of something to place to play there as well?
I really hope so, right? I mean, we're all about trying to take Ethereum to the 99%, not the 1%. Right. And this is why I say so. I mean, we present Status when you land in the app as an instant messenger, right? So it's just a chat interface, and people are already intimately familiar with what that is and how to use it. And then we can sort of take people one step down at a time. So once you've seen the instant messages, then you can like see that you've got a wallet and figure out, hey, like there's actually keys that are stored natively on my device. I'm running my own light node. I can actually choose which network I want to join. I can choose the conditions of joining that network. I can even go and choose like how dark I want my messages to be, and I can choose like who's going to provide push notifications to me and all of these different things, right? But like, it's initially just an instant messenger that you land in, right? And this is sort of like the educational journey that we hope to be able to take like a wide majority of people on, not just sort of like techno geeks, although obviously we love you guys, right?
No, I think as you say, like instant messaging is something that broadly everyone gets, broadly everyone gets. So I mean, it's a great kind of gateway drug, right, to the blockchain.
Yes, yeah.
So we're here obviously at EDCon, which is this sort of technical developer conference. Are there any particular kind of upcoming areas of research or kind of proposals for the Ethereum network or changes to the Ethereum network that you're particularly excited about or that are particularly relevant to Status?
So, I mean, as always, there are a number, and it's difficult to keep up with the ones and figure out like which is going to be the most important for us. I think that figuring out how to do sharding properly is probably going to be very, very important for everybody in the ecosystem, right? Because if we're going to build systems that can actually scale across the globe and handle the sort of transactional load that will imply, we are going to need some changes at the protocol layer, and that's quite important. But I think that's one of the features of implementing a Turing-complete language on a blockchain is that you can think about scaling not just at the protocol layer, but also at the application layer. So you can build like a really neat set of smart contracts like Trubit has, for instance, and they're doing sort of off-chain verification. And I'm really, really excited to see like what Trubit is able to implement, because I think that there's some interesting things that we'll be looking to do with them and from Status. And like the other guys who haven't really spoken here yet, but the people that I'm most excited about, like currently, are in fact a crew called the Foam Network, who are doing decentralized proof of location, and not using GPS because it can be so spoofed. And like obviously for us, that's going to be very, very important, because like we have this notion of sort of discovery in Status, and when you build decentralized networks, it's really important that you're able to discover peers that are close to you that are sort of providing relevant products and services. And like having decentralized proof of location baked into a smart contract standard is a really, really cool way of doing that.
That is very cool. So how do they do decentralized proof of location? Is it kind of like a collective view of people's location? Is it based on who you're close to and where they're close to? Or
basically, I mean, the idea here really is that you can incentivize people to run their own sort of radio transmitters, and then you can triangulate people's location based on that. And like it gets much more hectic than that, right? There's a new protocol which was like announced this year at CES. It's called 802.11.ax, and this is like it's a transmission mechanism that's like really allows for mesh networks to become like a properly viable thing, right? So we're talking about like at least a 2 kilometer radius for running like from your phone, right? So Qualcomm and these guys have actually implemented the initial sort of versions of this stuff. It's only due to release next year. And when you combine like this sort of like Moore's law happening on like the actual technology capable of running like a truly decentralized internet itself, right? Like everybody being a part of a mesh network, not requiring ISPs and all of that stuff. That was one part of the puzzle, and now we've been able to add to that, the incentivization, such that like you can use cryptographic tokens on a global ledger to actually like get people to do stuff. Those two things together, like, I think it's really difficult to imagine what the world is going to look like 10 or 20 years from now with some of the stuff that's coming out.
And maybe less than 10
maybe less.
That's great. Andy, thank you very much for your time. It's been great to meet you and talk to you. Cool. Thank you very much. Cheers.